The ideas that gave birth to our nation are the ideas that our nation is resistant to right now, and we should talk about that all the time.
In a world where narratives are shaped by corporations and gatekeepers, independent voices matter more than ever. Badlands Media brings together citizen journalists, researchers, and independent thinkers.
The truth is triggering.
Question the narrative. Explore the facts.
Its authenticity, courage, resilience.
Search for the truth others won't.
It's not about being first or being right.
The information war is changing.
It's about being authentic.
Embrace the friction.
Embrace the friction.
Shut the f*** up.
Authentically antagonizing. Join the movement.
I'm going to say how I feel.
Follow Badlands Media.
This is about the future.
The Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Welcome, everybody watching this week's episode of Breaking History. I'm just doing this show from a little hotel room in Vancouver, so I'm a little bit cramped, but I think that we've been able to get this show working out pretty well. I suspect that unlike the last episode, there is no technical glitches and my voice is being heard by those watching this live broadcast. So greetings and salutations. For those who recall the last episode, episode 6 of this relatively new show, Breaking Free of Psyops, dealt with the UFO topic in a myriad of ways. And a lot of that material was derived from a documentary that my wife, myself, and Jason Dahl, our collaborator, friend, put together, who's a filmmaking brilliant mind. And there, you know, what we tried to do was weave together in that episode the parallel, the dynamics that people often treat as separate, but were always one thing, just different aspects of one psychological warfare operation on an entire generation that was targeted, largely whom had been born after World War II. I just got very, very blurry there. I don't know why this camera chooses to do that periodically, so I do apologize for the blurriness. But an entire baby boomer generation was subject to this psychological warfare operation. I don't know if that has ever been done before this moment, where a whole generation was targeted, but it happened. And so what we did in that episode and what we did in that documentary is we treated, as much as I could, the development of MK Ultra, the psychedelic operation that infused drugs, mind drugs, into the campuses all across the United States, as those same forces of the CIA, of British intelligence, that were manufacturing and promulgating those mind drugs to open up the doors of perception, as Aldous Huxley had said, to help the youth create new realities. If you don't like the reality that you're living in, don't correct the reality. Just create new realities that you can live in. And really, this was an inversion of the ethos of the best of Western civilization, which had formerly been managed or been maintained by this virtuous idea that if the world around you is unjust, it's not a sign that God is evil, but it's a sign that you are mandated to be an instrument of God and justice and try your best to correct that world in harmony with an ideal that we have inside of our hearts and minds of reason, of justice, of goodness. And that was inverted. So you see, the what was happening was a lot of these kids who were getting nihilistic philosophy infused into their early conditioning. There was a lot of predictive programming. There was a lot of drugs as the world was being lit on fire, as the nation of America that they thought was this beautiful, good nation of 1776 ideals was actually behaving more and more like an evil empire, right? Murdering nationalist leaders around the world, including her own leaders like John F. Kennedy, were being killed in front of everyone's eyes in a ritualistic manner, then his brother, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Fred Hampton. So Vietnam Wars were brewing, you know, escapism became a thing. And I'm reminded that it's Memorial Day today as well. So I think it's good that we remember just what had happened, right? To shift the gears of Western civilization from the right course we'd formerly been moving on towards something really strange. And within that, you had what was also clearly being developed around Alan Dulles, and we went through a lot of those elements and a lot of those players. Alan Dulles had an advisor, a spiritual psychiatric advisor in the form of Carl Jung, who was an OSS operative, and wrote a manual for social engineers on how to use the UFO ET mythos in the creation of new legends, new sacred lore to shape the identities of the new generations that would be expected to be born in the age of Aquarius, which Carl Jung was also an enthusiastic high priest. The fact that much of our current society has Jungian concepts shaping it should also not be seen as a coincidence. So again, the drugs, the transformation of America into from a republic into an empire, and the new gods, the new alien ET deities that we would be sold with new mythos around being our creators. It's not God, it's not Jesus, it's not Muhammad, those are obsolete ideas of religion. The new religion will have alien Jesus, alien Muhammad, right? Clairvoyant, psychic Jesus that would travel the astral plane and be infused with a different idea of a more sci-fi Holy Spirit that would allow him to walk on water and raise the dead and what have you. And a lot of this, we were told, was going to be brewed or the effect of hybrid laboratories where advanced alien beings, maybe they were demon aliens, maybe they were angel aliens, whatever. There's different flavors of this story, bred us by genetically modifying us with monkeys a long time ago. So anyway, you see how this goes. Today, I'd like to continue this thread because we've got the ball rolling, but I think there's a little bit more meat to put on the bones, and the show is only so long. So I prepared a few additional slides for today's episode. But before we do anything, which we'll tackle the myth of Roswell, explicitly Roswell, the Roswell myth, which is, I think, a very big foundation stone in the entire artifice of the congressional inquiries into UAPs and what have you. And this includes also congressional inquiries in Mexico and in European parliamentary committees. So a lot of this hinges upon the belief and that the Roswell story of crashed UFOs was true. It really does. So before we do any of that, let's listen to a word or two from today's sponsors, and then we'll jump right into it. So the first thing I got here is Tamarack Garden. So let's hear what Tamarack Garden has to say.
Your body doesn't need more synthetic fixes. It needs real plant medicine. Wild herbs are packed with minerals, adaptogens, and healing compounds your body actually recognizes and can use, supporting energy, immunity, and balance from the inside out. At Tamarack Garden, our supplements bring these overlooked weeds and wildflowers back into your daily routine. Don't just manage symptoms, support your body and eat your weeds. Head to tamarackgarden.com for $10 off your order of $50 or more when you use code BADLANDS at checkout.
All right. Thank you, Tamarack Garden. And now let's hear a word from Van Man. Oh, all right. So ready to upgrade your daily routine with truly clean, natural products, no exceptions? Start in the kitchen with Van Man's Pure Cooking Tallow, perfect for high heating cooking, adding rich, clean flavor to your meals. For your daily cleanse, try the Gentle Tallow soaps, the classic honey, pine, or coconut, pine tar or coconut. These bars deliver a rich, natural lather that leaves your skin feeling clean, soft, and refreshed. Give your smile real care with Miracle Tooth Powder in flavors like mint bone, cinnabone, or original. Customers rave about whiter, stronger teeth and fresher breath with no harsh chemicals. Van Man also offers great products like hair care, eye cream, and more, all made with clean, natural ingredients and no exceptions. Right now, enjoy free U.S. shipping on orders over $40. Head over to badlandsmedia.tv/VanMan today. All right. So without further ado, let's just jump right into today's show. And I think everyone has noticed that I typically enjoy the classroom format, so don't feel like you need to be, prepare for a test, but that's the style I enjoy when I'm just going solo on a show. So we'll pull out the slides here. briefly, Roswell, the making of a modern myth, is what we're going to start with. And I'd like to begin with a quote by Lawrence Rockefeller. That's a picture of the fellow right there. He died in I think 2002, 2003, I believe. He was quite old. And he was one of the 5 Rockefeller brothers who were the grandsons of John D. Rockefeller, the Standard Oil magnate, but also the figure with the entire clan, which was largely a devoted family to securing an Anglo-American world governance architecture in some form of new world order. And for those who, again, watched the last episode, we had a little Rockefeller Brothers program of 1956, which Henry Kissinger worked on. Henry Luce, the fascist promoter of Mussolini in America, who ran Time and Life magazines, was also a part of this committee. And that program called for transforming America into a new American century so that the world would be sort of animated by a new Pax Americana instead of the idea of an American republic. That would be the new notion. And in that program, it literally calls for preparing the groundwork for a new world order. And many of those people who played a role in that architecture were also co-founders with many unreconstructed Nazis like Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who created the Bilderberg Group around that very same time to help organize, especially using the front of private monopolies and corporations, as well as government agencies that would work together in taking down the instruments on all levels, psychological, spiritual, and physical, geopolitical, of the nation-state architecture and the traditional family values, the ideas of God. And I think good religion in general had to be taken down, destroyed by those players in this very sick game. So Lawrence Rockefeller, at the very end of his highly productive life, and I don't mean productive in a positive way, I just meant he got a lot done. He had this interesting commitment for about the last 12 or 13 years, which was really UFO disclosure. And in 1994, he describes here the importance he feels that needs to be placed upon legitimizing the Roswell incident. And he says, the July 1947 Roswell incident would be a logical and challenging place to start. While much in the public sector has been written about it, the government has had nothing to say about it after the original press release saying that a flying disc had been recovered was retracted. The public record of this incident has been thoroughly analyzed. Further information depends upon access to classified information. Many are convinced that Roswell marks the beginning of government secrecy about UFOs. However, whatever the truth of Roswell, a definite statement about it from the government would be very important. If it actually was UFO related, it could be used to start the process of reversing the government's 40+ years of denial on the subject. If this specific project initiative is successful, it will become an important prototype for the release of all UFO information. Obviously, the means of carrying out this event-related review is up to you. However, to the extent we can be helpful, we want to be. Now, again, this is a very strange passion for the man who is largely known as the father of American conservation. He devoted his life to things like the Prince Philip, Prince Bernhard program of the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, devoted to removing vast swaths of America and the world out of human economic development and towards nature conservation as a program largely to inhibit the means of production, the means of supporting human life, because at the end of the day, the big agenda is global depopulation. We cannot forget that. But to spend all of that time, and then for the last 10 years, sort of at the pinnacle of your entire long career, to devote all of your energy and resources to the cause of what he became known for at the end was the UFO disclosure movement. He initiated the Rockefeller Disclosure Program for the White House. The Clinton White House welcomed him in. These are a picture of his better known brothers. I think he's the lesser known of those. David Rockefeller is probably the most well-known. Nelson Rockefeller, that's sitting there on his right, nearly became president when Gerald Ford was nearly killed by a member of the Manson family, and he would have become the president at that time. The pretty much all Trilateral Commission members. That's a picture of him with Hillary Clinton. We looked at this in our last episode. There was another picture I didn't pull out just now of him and Bill Clinton in the White House. He was a major backer of the Clintons in 1992 in the election. And one of the first things that Bill Clinton did was adopt Lawrence Rockefeller's program for releasing, for the first time, you had the mass batch of millions of files pertaining to UFO testimonials and eyewitness testimony over years of things people had seen in the sky that they could not account for, that were released, that were classified, that were released by Bill Clinton, which in many ways stimulated the new burgeoning revival of the UFO truth movement at that period, who were very enlivened by this great success. John Podesta as well, who I would say also looks strangely like a younger Lawrence Rockefeller. There's been some speculation that I believe has some merit, that he might have been the love child of Lawrence Rockefeller, but we'll leave that in the speculation bin for now. But as pointed out, he was the father of American conservationism. That's a picture of him right there on the right with John F. Kennedy after they had, I don't think John F. Kennedy realized the nefariousness of what this program was. But yeah, his big thing was to expand the protocols around nature conservation parks that would forever be off limits from hydroelectric dams, which JFK was trying to do and had done quite well even in the short time that he was president. But it would have gone a lot further had this not been used to block it. The Rockefeller brothers, including Lawrence as well as a young man, played a direct role in funding something that many people watching this might have heard of, the War of the Worlds radio broadcast. So in some ways, you could say that Lawrence Rockefeller, by the end of his life, was just returning to his early formative commitments at the earliest opening of his political career as a bankroller of Psyops. And of course, this is a story that took the fiction novel of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells and adapted it to a New York audience or an American audience in the wake or the opening moments as World War II was beginning in 1939, and infused within a Halloween radio broadcast what appeared to be a real emergency radio broadcast to the American people about alien invaders who had begun slaughtering massive amounts of American citizens. And largely what we could say, I mean, those who carried it out were people like Lazarfield, Paul Lazarfield, somebody who was very high up at the Princeton Radio Research Lab that was carrying out a lot of this work. People who were very much tied to Henry Luce as well were directing this program. And Orson Welles, who's featured there, was one of the key broadcasters announcing this thing. And they wanted to see just how people would react. What would be the mass psychological profile of people who would be led to believe that invaders from another galaxy or another planet were coming in? Would we rally? Would we riot? Would we call for world government, as H.G. Wells had said that would be the only way to get world government, as well as many figures around Winston Churchill. Lord Mountbatten also made a point that the only way we would ever have peace on Earth and resolve the communist capitalist dichotomy was if we had alien invaders from Mars. So would that be what happens? So you could say that, again, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund that he was always in charge of for many, many years was just the thing that both got the UFO PSYOP operation going in 1938, and then what he came back to really finish off what he started by the end of his life. One of the capstone meetings was at his ranch in Wyoming. So Lawrence Rockefeller owns a massive ranch, and he invited over a multi-day symposium a number of people who would go on to be leading influencers within the UFO disclosure movement, of which several are just noted there. Stephen Greer of the Human Potential Foundation and strange B'nai B'rith Israeli intelligence warfare operations that he was also a part of in the 1970s. That figure, Stephen Greer, was brought in to be a high priest, a spiritualist high priest, promoting one narrative of the benevolent aliens that would be coming down to save us from nuclear war and other things that we had brought upon ourselves, or maybe that the Greys, the evil versions of those aliens from other planets, were trying to get us to do, so that we would maybe, I don't know. I think there's different narratives, different creative writing spins. The David Icke version is takes on a little bit more of a nefarious alien character, where they want to pretty much get us to kill ourselves, as David Icke had said, by creating global warming so that we all die and the sea levels raise and the world gets warm, like in a way that that lizards enjoy, because lizards don't like cold weather, and that's what global warming was being caused by these shape-shifting aliens, says David Icke. So he creates one counterpole to Stephen Greer, who has a slightly different narrative. Linda Moulton Howe was brought in. Robert Bigelow, who went on to create the National Institute for Discovery Science, was brought in as well and became a billionaire around this time, as well as a real estate magnate, featuring franchise hotels all over the United States and elsewhere, that he then put into resources for paranormal funding scientific studies into demons in his headquarters at Skinwalker Ranch, which was then funded and made into reality TV shows and fiction books and comic books to, again, fuse the UFO thing, the demonology thing, werewolves, the paranormal, all together with spirit mediums, kind of like some new hodgepodge of the 19th century spiritualist fanaticism, but now with a 21st century veneer involving a little bit more space opera, and a lot of Scientologists that will come into play. We have Lawrence Rockefeller right there, of course. There's a number of other people, a particular psychiatrist who's a specialist in demonology and exorcism, featured on the right-hand side, whose name is all of a sudden escaping me, but who's being promoted quite heavily today. So what happened? What's up with Roswell? Roswell was a situation in 1947, just a couple of weeks after the Arnold sightings. So there was already the first major popularized sightings over Washington by Kenneth Arnold, a pilot who reported certain things that he saw, certain flying machines that he could not account for. Whether or not he was telling the truth, or whether these machines were part of the flying saucer operation of the Nazis that were brought in and incorporated into America's secret science program under Penemunda, I don't know. Could have been made up. It could have been, again, he might have been one of the many thousands of civilians and even military officials who had seen things they were not authorized to understand or be briefed about, of new flying drones, new flying saucers, and other flying technologies, and simply reported it. And a spin was given by the media that was, again, tied to intelligence agencies. And here's Jesse Marcel, who was the, I think, Air Force intelligence, or was it naval intelligence? I get my intelligence agencies in the military confused sometimes. But he was an intelligence operative and somebody who was assigned, the only person who had actually seen this crash, who was authorized to take the testimonials of this rancher named Mac Brazel, who basically was a rancher. He just saw that something weird had crashed. As he reported it, there was some tinfoil, there was a couple of pounds of ribbon, some mesh. So, he brought some of that over, and Jesse Marcel, a few hours later, was told to go down, check out what Mac Brazel had seen, and Jesse Marcel gathered over the course of a couple of acres, basically just that very thing that Jesse Marcel had, that Mac Brazel had reported. So, you see him there with the various items in somebody's house that were photographed, featuring, again, what looks like aluminum foil, tin, some wood. And then what happened was, right there afterwards, this is July 8th, just a couple of days after this incident, you have the Roswell Daily Record publishes that the RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. So you have now a nationally broadcast story pertaining to this flying saucer, and a claim is made by Jesse Marcel that it is that an entire saucer was picked up, but nobody ever saw the saucer, and that wasn't part of any of the registered items that were reported by Mac Brazel, or even him originally. But then that's hushed up. So people within the military say, okay, stop talking about this. And the official line became, it was an experimental weather balloon that was assigned to track atomic weapons explosions and their effects. There's a secret program that was declassified that does corroborate that. If that's true, I don't know. It might be. It might be possible that it was, again, another experimental flying saucer being test flown, which went awry and which crashed in the desert. That's possible too. I don't know. But that was a fishy incident. And it was sort of forgotten for a number of years until the mid-70s. And at that time, the National Enquirer revived the story and began promoting, they didn't only promote it, they literally republished the entire issue of the Roswell Daily Record, was republished in full by the National Enquirer, which by this point in the 70s, it was founded in, I believe, 1951 by Generoso Pope Jr., which we'll say something about. But by the 1970s, it was very popular. You know, housewives and others were buying this thing, and it was entertaining because there was an infusion of true information, right? True information about geopolitics and about conspiracies infused into total creative writing of 3-headed alien babies being born from a monkey, and, you know, just the craziest stuff of Elvis, you know, playing cards in secret bunkers with Jimmy Stewart and things like that, you know, who were actually all aliens and part of an alien. So you had a lot of creative writing being infused into, a lot of fiction being infused into reality and being sold in bookstores and magazine shops and supermarkets all over America. And this is what was reviving something that people had forgotten for about 30 years after 1947, and adding a lot more coloring, a lot more detail after those years had passed. Now, the question of the authenticity of Jesse Marcel's testimonials becomes a very important issue. Obviously, he's the only eyewitness to this entire thing. A lot of it hinges upon this guy being a legitimate voice of truth who actually cares about reality and exposing lies. And the Kaupflop, I don't know how to pronounce that, quarterly, produced a very interesting expose. I think there had been other exposés before this. This was December 8th, 1995, published by Robert G. Todd. Again, Todd was also using already existent work of other researchers who had looked into the background of Jesse Marcel and discovered that pretty much most of his story that he told of his own heroic career in the Air Force was largely made up. There was a lot of holes. And this guy likes embellishing stories about his grandeur and greatness that are just provably false. So again, this guy does have a penchant for lying, and that became something provable. One claim here just demonstrated was that Jesse Marcel claimed that he had been a pilot since 1928 and had over 3,000 hours of piloting time. That was false. The reality was, and that the FAA, which has complete records going back to well before 1928, has never heard of Jesse Marcel, that his reserve officer career brief dated the 20th of November, 1947, lists his flying experience as none. So according to official records, he never had any actual flying experience. His application for appointment as a second lieutenant completed and signed by Marcel in 1942 January doesn't support this claim at all. And they basically go on to say that, if anything, he might have been a photographer allowed onto reconnaissance flights. He said that he had a lot of firefighting experience. He was in firefights in the sky. That's not true. That in his records, there is not a single incident of any type of fight he would ever engage in. As noted, he might have been at best a guy taking photographs of reconnaissance missions, and that would pretty much be it. Another claim here in this little site that extracted some of Robert Todd's work claims that Marcel claimed he was an aide to General Hap Arnold, and that it was Hap Arnold who decided he should go into an intelligence school. It seems to be true that he went into an intelligence training of some sort in the military, but no. It says here the reality was that Marcel applied for an appointment as a second lieutenant when he was still working for Shell Oil, the Rockefeller adjacent Shell, or what became Shell Dutch Oil. His first assignment in the military was as a student in Army Air Force Intelligence School in Harrisburg. The decision to send him to intelligence school had been made prior to his entering the service. So before he entered the military, when he was still working for the Rockefeller machine, the decision was made to put him into military intelligence training, which is, again, very fishy. His records do not show any assignments that might have had him working with or for General Arnold prior to December 1948. Again, very fishy. And just a couple more here that I think are useful. One claim here is that Marcel claimed that he had a bachelor's degree in physics from George Washington University and had attended several universities, New York University, LSU, I don't know what that is, and the OSU University. I got to get the actual abbreviations, what they stand for, which universities those are. The reality is that Marcel, though he claimed these things, that he had attended LSU for 1 year as a non-credit student, this later grew into 1.5 years. So his original claim was that it was 1 year as a non-credit student. Then it changes to 1.5 years. The LSU has no records of Marcel, although they do have records of his son, Jesse Marcel Jr., but they don't have records of the father. And the George Washington University has no records of his ever attending, let alone graduating with a degree in physics. At the request of Robert Todd, they conducted a second search with the same results. So he just lied about all of his credentials, and it goes on. And this is actually a very thick expose of the lies that this guy lived. He literally lived in his own fiction. Was he one of those people who believed that my stories are reality? There are people like that. They're so detached with any connection to reality that they believe that if they have conviction and they believe the lies that they tell, that it is equally true. It might as well be true. It's the same thing. And if you don't believe in truth, it becomes easy to find yourself on this type of psychological pathway, which makes you easily an agency for powerful brokers that would like to everybody to believe in lies told by liars. So that's part of how this game works. And we're good people, right? Human beings are typically quite good in our essence, and we often project on to others our own desire to be honest, to be good, to live a happy life, to try to not lie, and it causes some blind spots when you're dealing with real psychological warfare operations, especially with an occult twist. That causes good people to often want to believe the testimonials of people who sound nice. They're using flowery language. They speak with authenticity, but they're lying. And one of the things here that I think is another data point that's useful is a picture of Frank Costello, a major Italian-American crime boss of the Luciano crime family, Lucky Luciano being the key figure who, as we discovered in episode 4 on Who's Behind Our Drug Problems, Lucky Luciano was employed by the CIA after World War II, first the OSS, then the CIA, to reconstruct his entire criminal syndicate operations. He was released from jail, sent to build the Sicilian mafia in coordination with the KMT, the Kuomintang, U.S. military intelligence operations that would then set up the entire infrastructure for global narcotics and basically the drugs and narco operations more broadly that would always be run as part of the CIA and MI6. It wasn't part outside of that. And Frank Costello comes into the story as a leading figure within the Luciano crime family because it was his money that bankrolled this guy. So this guy is named Generoso Pope Jr. And Generoso Pope Jr. was the son of Generoso Pope Sr., as you could imagine. Generoso Pope Sr. was also a member of the Lucky Luciano crime family, a major Italian crime boss who was tied to the same CIA Dulles operations. And this particular fellow took Frank Costello's money, I think it was a $70,000 investment, as the startup capital for the creation of his new project in 1951 called the National Enquirer. So he's the founder and president of the National Enquirer and maintained that role for many years. That's his father, Generoso Pope Sr. Behind him is a Time magazine relief or a Life magazine picture of Mussolini. General Pope Sr., just like Lucky Luciano, were also allied with and promoters of Mussolini and fascism. There's a lot more to say about him. Also was a promoter and a friend of Henry Luce, who was working with Lawrence Rockefeller at that same time to transform America into an empire. So there's that. So we have now the National Enquirer that still exists, and it just took on even more aspects, which is playing a role in reviving the Roswell mythos in the 70s. And this is a guy named Mark Pilkington, who's a UFO researcher. He did a fantastic book called The Mirage Men, where he discovered along the way that many of those influencers behind the UFO mythos are misinformation operatives from military intelligence circles. And he goes through a lot of that in the form of this book, which is a great read from 2010. It was turned into a movie that I think is freely available on YouTube even now. If you type in Mirage Men, it's a great film. And I was inspired by a lot of his work in creating our Roswell episode 4 of the Hidden Hand Behind UFO documentary series. And Mark Pilkington wrote that the National Enquirer had set up a blue ribbon panel on UFOs in conjunction with civilian research organizations, APRO, and the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, NICAP, and scientists, including J. Allen Hynek. The UFO groups passed their most interesting cases to the Enquirer, who offered to fund further research into the incidents. At the same time, the Enquirer was offering a cool $1 million to anybody who could prove that UFOs did indeed come from outer space, and not inconsiderable $5,000 to $10,000 to witnesses in what it declared to be the year's best cases. So it became kind of a national frenzy between 1976 and 1979 or so. Was the period that this blue ribbon panel on UFOs, overseen by J. Allen Hynek, who had himself been the key figure assigned to oversee the Robertson panel on UFOs in 1951, the earlier Project Grudge and Project Sign operations, as well as Project Blue Book, which ran from 1952 all the way up until 1969, 1969, as part of the CIA Special Inquiry Operation into UFOs. So that same J. Allen Hynek, who was first the big skeptic who was coming up with all sorts of lame theories about swamp gas and just the lamest scientific debunking efforts against the UFO story, was his first assignment for about 10 years. And then around 1964, he goes through an Saul to Paul evangelical type of reawakening and becomes the world's biggest evangelist for the UFO truth. And all of a sudden, he's devoting his life all the way till his death in 1984 to the cause of preparing the mass mind for accepting the reality of UFOs. So when Project Blue Book of the CIA, overseen by or launched by Richard Cabell and Charles Cabell of the, Richard Bissell and Charles Cabell, the second in command under Dulles at the CIA, and the head of the other guy, Richard Bissell, is the head of Area 51, as well as the Psychological Warfare OPW, the Office of Policy Coordination, the OPC, which is the psychological warfare branch of the CIA. That's the same Richard Bissell who was working with Cabell, the the vice director of the CIA, in launching Blue Book. Right, that goes on. So that Blue Book finally ends, and the new iteration of Project Blue Book is the Blue Ribbon Panel. So that's interesting, and a big target of these original CIA military Project Grudge, Project Sign, Project Blue Book, Robertson panel inquiry, the Tizard UFO panel in England. Their original focus was not so much the mass civilian mind, but principally the military intelligence people. So actual people who are in a position of authority and in power positions to defend the Republic. They would be the first to be psychologically targeted in this secret warfare operation to convince a number of them that the real issue is UFO cover-up and UFO collusion with your government. And then once you could get a sufficient number of people in military and intelligence circles to become convinced and promoted to higher positions of authority within those administrations, then you could begin to branch out and take it to the next level where you have enough people now devoted to the truth the cause of disclosure, who would now be collaborators in promoting the message to the civilian psyche. So this is now the new phase in the 70s, once MK Ultra is finally being shut down in 1975. It's a big year. You have the revelations of the Church Committee hearings that are making the point that Project Mockingbird was being run to largely install CIA narratives into all major media, print and televised. That the media isn't the media. This was all becoming public, along with MK Ultra. The evidence of that was becoming public too. So now a new phase had to be created to replace the old obsolete systems, which again took the form of the Blue Ribbon Panel that began to offer high money prizes for any type of civilian experiences, testimonials, but even more valuable would be evidence of, here's one example from a newspaper, $1 million reward offered. 2 distinguished jurists will make the final decision. So I don't know who exactly won, but I know many people did get the $5,000 to $10,000 prizes when they could come up with clever ways of making like silver balls that somebody would say that landed in their backyard. And look, the silver ball is like able to trail my walking stick that might have a little metal object inside of it. So people were basically being rewarded. A whole industry around trickery was being created. People were, finding alien bodies in their backyards or in the forest that turned out to be, babies, dead babies that were a few years old that maybe were dug out of graves and fused with like bat heads or other types of animals, llamas, that llama skulls that were just infused into and maybe given a little bit of a polish, kind of like what they did for the Piltdown Man hoax back in 1910 or 1911, overseen again by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, which turned out to be a big find that so-called proved the missing link and proved Darwin to be true, but in reality was always just a hoax of like a dog canine teeth mixed in with an orangutan skull and a human jawbone that they just found in broken pieces somewhere in England and sold it to a incredulous audience as being now proof that Darwin was right. And it was always a hoax. So then they just sort of did that. Now people started doing that in the thousands to try to get monetary prizes, which the National Enquirer was far too happy to promote in a number of ways. And that's a picture of the National Inquiry of the Blue Ribbon UFO panel with J. Allen Hynek there smoking his pipe as he always did, and other members of the committee. There he is there with on a picture on the right. This is around the same time as well that he appears at the United Nations with Jacques Vallée. We talked about this in the last episode, calling for a one world government supervisory board to collect and oversee all UFO related testimonials from around the world. So they're calling for, again, world government agencies to deal with UFOs. There he is in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and the poster. The Steven Spielberg movie was one of the early high-budget propaganda films to again prepare the collective dream, the collective psyche around the idea of UFO revelation, ET revelations and communications, but now through with a telepathic psychic twist that chosen special people from among the human cattle would be touched with communications, possessing them to go to a certain location at a mountain that would be prearranged by the aliens to make proper contact and bring up their selected chosen people, like played by Richard Dreyfuss, who would leave his entire family. It was really pathetic. Leave his entire family to go and I guess get anal probed for the rest of his life in flying saucers in space. It's pretty sad. Anyway, so you had J. Allen Hynek, who was the guy who actually codified and started giving a scientific cover to the UFO story. He created the first, second, third, fourth encounters of various degrees. That type of programming was his creation. He was a guru of Steven Spielberg. He played a role also advising Spielberg on a number of other projects, E.T. being another one. E.T. also creating a sort of image in the mass collective psyche that was then used by this guy, Jose Jaime Maissan, who's a UFO researcher and a hoaxer who's been caught doing something like 20 fraudulent hoaxes, high publicity since the 90s in Mexico. And here's one case where one of his hoaxes, and again, this is a proven hoax, was brought to the Mexican Congress in 2023, where he brought these 1,000-year-old Peruvian aliens, which was covered again by mainstream media, you name it. He'd been earlier working for the National Enquirer since the 90s as well. So he has this history. Turns out these things, which look a lot like the ET prototype, right? Like that's clearly inspired, these little mini alien beings, clearly touching on the image of ET, the extraterrestrial, popularized by Steven Spielberg. It's touching on that. And they're basically mummified bodies of children that had been manipulated by grave robbers and probably by other specialists to appear to be, aliens. This also takes the direct script from the 2008 movie, Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, which was literally exactly this very story of Peruvian aliens that had been discovered by Indiana Jones, and watch the movie. But it just takes directly from fiction and now infuses it into reality. And this guy, like I said, is a major hoaxer. I wrote a whole essay on all of the different tricks and lies this guy has gotten caught doing, and he keeps doing it. And it gets published by the Gaia channel and things like that to legitimize him along with Graham Hancock is another one who, just like Jamie Maussan is Jose Jamie Maussan is doing the exact same thing, getting promoted by the exact same players. And I mentioned that the NICEP, the National Institute, or the Citizens Investigation organization that was set up in 1956. I'm just blanking all of a sudden. The National Citizens Inquiry on Aerial Phenomenon. Anyway, it was set up in 1956. And it also was a co-funder of the Blue Ribbon program under the National Enquirer. So the National Enquirer and this group that were now funding this thing that was doling out lots of money to Americans and Canadians from in the 1970s to come up with UFO stories. So why is this useful? Well, if you actually look at it, this whole thing was set up by the CIA. It acts like a civilian research organization, but it was always set up by, there's this guy here, Roscoe Hillenkoetter, who was the first director of the CIA, who was the founder and director of NICAP. You have Joseph Bryan III, a high-level Grandmaster Freemason and a leader at the Office of Policy Coordination under Bissell, the Psychological Warfare Bureau of the CIA, who also was a leading director, also was a key figure in the setting up of MK Ultra in 1953. So the fact that he in 1956 is working with Roscoe Hillenkoetter to create this agency. You have C.D. Jackson, who is the Psychological Warfare board member at the OSS and confidant of Henry Luce, who's another board member of the NICEP. He's also a friend. So C.D. Jackson, who's not here featured on the slide, is also the managing director of Time Life magazine in the 1950s and the 1960s. He's the guy who bought the Zapruder film and then put it in a vault in Time Life headquarters, which he hid for 5 years, which proved that JFK could not have been killed from the back, as the popular Dulles Committee, the Warren Commission inquiry had proclaimed, but rather was shot first from the front, where his head was clearly sent backwards. And that film was completely suppressed by C.D. Jackson, again, a co-creator of this. He also helped Prince Bernhard in setting up the Bilderberg Group in 1954, the same year that they're creating MK Ultra. He is the same guy who's creating the Bilderberg Group with Prince Bernhard. And he's just a very, very gross person. But it's not just him, too. You have Nicolas de Rochefort, a white Russian espionage operative who worked as a Voice of America script editor during the Cold War, who's a NICAP board member And he also worked for the CIA's psychological warfare department as well. And I'm just naming a few. There's a lot more. So you have this whole thing working also with this new guy who is deployed to play a very big role. His name is William Moore, and he co-wrote a book with Charles Berlitz called The Roswell Incident, which doesn't really take any new information, but it adds a lot more new anecdotal evidence. Basically, it's a book full of anecdotal testimonials, as well as shadowy, anonymous government insiders telling him things, which formed the basis of this book. Now, Charles Berlitz is military intelligence. That's his background. That's his training. The co-author of this book. Charles Berlitz's first book, his first foray into novel writing, was the Bermuda Triangle story that he popularized the year before, publishing the Roswell Incident with Moore. Moore is also a leader at APRO, that is the other civilian UFO research group with NISAP that was working with the National Enquirer under the Blue Ribbon Committee. And around the same time, 1976, 77, as all of this is happening, we have an explosion of films. It's not just the Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977, but you have Sun Classic Pictures, a Mormon-run film studio run by this guy, Patrick Frole Jr., who's photographed there on the right, who's the major bankroller behind a lot of this. These films like Hangar 18, which is a movie that's produced in 1978, with the collusion of NASA. Most of it is filmed on NASA, in NASA buildings. So this required government NASA collusion with Mormon-run film studios to promote films like Hangar 18, which feature the U.S. government as the villain in the story, overseeing a major cover-up of UFOs that, as we discover, or the characters discovered by the end, were the actual inventors of humankind and had been silently shaping all of human civilization since they genetically modified us from monkeys millions of years ago, and have been there this entire time. And the big bad government is trying to kill all of the heroes of the movie to stop them from telling the truth, which finally comes out at the end of the movie. You have Capricorn 1, another movie around the same time, trying to portray all space exploration as a government hoax. And many of these movies are coming out, but the fact that they require government support and collaboration means that there are highly powerful forces at this time installed to authorize this in the first place. Because in the Cold War, the U.S. government would not willingly portray themselves as villains during the height of the Cold War, on any regard. So that's very shady. So Sun Classics, which also features a symbol of a blackened sun, sort of a black sun symbol, which I think has some occult undertones, was putting out a lot of movies promoting the Gnostic Gospels that were earlier unveiled, after 1945, promoted by Carl Jung and the Carl Jung Institute, which did all of the original translations of the Nag Hammadi scriptures, proving that Jesus was actually a Luciferian being with secret teachings for his inner elites, from the Book of Philip and Book of Thomas and the Thunder Perfect Mind, the Secret Apocryphon of John, and all of these Nag Hammadi scriptures produced between the 1st and 4th century that were all unveiled to the world, sponsored by Carl Jung, and then popularized by a lot of these Mormon esoteric institutions into the pop culture that then were trying to also promote movies that were proclaiming humans were basically the artificial effect of alien gods. So one of the key sources for William Moore in his Roswell incident, and who continues to be his source, is known as Richard Doty. Richard Doty is a high-level player, a figure in Air Force intelligence, and he begins giving classified information to William Moore, as well as Linda Moulton Howe, proving that it wasn't just Roswell, but it was rather 4 different alien crash sites, of which they're featured there, that in Arizona and New Mexico, that all happened between 1947 and 1952, some of which featured real aliens that were alive still and kept alive for several years, giving information and signing treaties with Eisenhower and first Truman, so that maybe Truman and Eisenhower would be allowed to recuperate and use technologies in secret recuperated from the crashed UFOs, and in exchange, the UFOs, the ETs would be allowed to continue to anally probe human victims in their own weird, sick, satanic rituals, or maybe build underground bases or underwater bases authorized by the U.S. government. So that was a part of the new mythos that Linda Moulton Howe became a willing promoter of, the woman who was brought to Lawrence Rockefeller's headquarters in Wyoming there, that picture at the beginning. And it also formed the basis of the Majestic 12 hoax. So that was another hoax, proven to be a hoax, and we go through in much greater detail in my Roswell documentary, which was begun again by William Moore, who receives batches of information with a number of other individuals at this time in 1984. It becomes known as Majestic 12, the Special Operations Manual. You can get the full transcript of these Majestic 12 documents, which are all released by Moore and others from his small coterie, that reveal, and there's a picture of the official symbology, the Illuminati symbology of the Majestic 12, that prove that there has been not just that Harry Truman signed off on these negotiations with the ETs that crashed, but that they allowed for these secret bases to be built, and all these things are now proven fully in these documents. But are they true, or are they forgeries? We know that the CIA is very good at creating forgeries. So is it true? And no, of course, it's not true. Forensic evidence has proven that the typewriters used in creating those seemingly official-looking government documents were actually typewriters that were only manufactured after 1963, proving that these things that proclaim to be 1947 to 1952 documents that feature an elite committee around Roscoe Hillenkoetter and pretty much all of the CIA operatives who create the NISAP and the APRO operations, masquerading as civilian front groups. It's pretty much just trying to say that they are actually the inner light of the government that were sanctioned with above top secret clearance to deal with the aliens. So not only was the typewriter built way after these things were supposed to have been written, the typewriter that made them, but Harry Truman's signature is identical in ways that no two human signatures. I could sign my name 1,000 times and they will look similar because it's my signature, but they won't be identical. There's always slight deviations. All of the Harry Truman signatures are identical with no flaws. Again, implying that's one of the best proofs of forgery out there. So then we have even more added to it. So this being, now late 80s is rolling around, early 90s, Bill Clinton is coming out, bringing in Lawrence Rockefeller into the White House, releasing a bunch of millions of anecdotal testimonials, right, including some of intelligence officers, aerospace scientists who also saw things they were not vetted to understand and believed in that maybe the alien story was the way to account for it. And they're joined by Colonel Philip J. Corso, who writes The Day After Roswell, a very popular book. Now, Corso was chief of counterintelligence during World War II. He was directly associated with Vatican intelligence for the U.S. military. He was responsible for setting up the Gehlen organization under Allen Dulles, the major Nazi war criminal who was Hitler's chief spy, was given new plush assignments overseeing West German intelligence in the Cold War. That would be overseen by Corso. Corso, by the way, just like this guy, just like that guy, Patrick Frole Jr., who runs Sun Classics, is a Knight of Malta, a Knight of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, a chivalric Gnostic order that had earlier been created to oversee the Crusades as a new reset of civilization 1,000 years ago. And this order, which also, by the way, Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's chief intelligence officer that I was just talking about, was also a member of the Order of Malta, and as was this guy Corso. So they're all members of this thing. And he's the guy who was assigned on the ground in Dallas, Texas, and began to promote the notion that Oswald was a KGB Manchurian candidate assigned to kill John F. Kennedy. And that was his on-the-ground assignment during JFK's murder and the years afterwards. So, this guy's saying within this book that not only are there two, but there's more species of aliens, upwards of 70, and they're having a civil war amongst themselves and also amongst humans who have a secret breakaway civilization and breakaway military that's battling these aliens in underground bases and within the earth and on the moon. And he's creating again a vast sort of bad Hollywood style script, a space opera, as L. Ron Hubbard called these things. And another data point is then brought up in 1995 when mainstream media, mainstream TV and news is broadcasting a full 18-minute production of alien autopsy, proving that in 1947, the aliens that had crashed and died in Roswell were actually being dissected. And this completely polarized the collective imagination. Now, the actual director of this program, Spyro Malaris, was not only an official stage magician, but had already been working for the BBC for many years. And he gave an interview in 2019 when he now describes this is like the best magic trick he's ever done. And he just says it was not an easy task. And apart from the look and feel, the film had to be correct in every aspect. The props, the costume, every little detail. I was fortunate to have access to professional filming and editing equipment. More importantly, I had also access to a handful of very talented people. For me, the alien autopsy film was a challenge. Could it be done? As a magician, I wanted to create the biggest illusion ever performed on a global stage. It was never meant to be anything else for me. Once it was created and it achieved worldwide acclaim, experts saying it was real, others saying it was not, no one proved it either way. And he's saying pretty much it was an illusionist trick. I did it. But also again, and he goes into much greater detail talking about the guts that he got from a local butcher down the street that they just put into this silicone, latex model of this alien. They found props of telephones that were from the 1940s. So it all looked very authentic. But it was a big hoax. And despite knowing this, the felt thought, this is the key thing about how this hypnotic long-term magic trickery works. These are long-term magic tricks that are multi-generational. So the way they work is through creating felt thoughts, right? That's the purpose of the Hollywood films. That's the purpose of like getting people to get into blurring reality from fiction, so that the emotion associated with the idea, the possibility of these fantastical stories is what resonates even after the logical side of the mind is led to disprovals or proofs that these stories are concoctions. That might be even accepted by the logical part of the mind, but the emotional part of the self continues to be affected by the sense of mystery, by the sense of discovery that we felt, of wonder when these stories were being told. And that's the darkness of these psyops. Richard Doty himself came out, that's him with a mustache years later, saying, I was trained by the Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency during my, can't read this actually. I was hoping I could actually see this much better. During my DIA career, I investigated unidentified flying object sightings throughout the southwestern part of the United States. We did conduct counterintelligence operations against people that were close to obtaining the truth about classified programs. Some might call the operations disinformation. So he pretty much admits that he's carrying out, part of his assignment was to carry out counterintelligence operations against people, and again, who were close to what kind of classified programs? Was it what we have been talking about of the Peenemünde, secret Manhattan Project operations that absorbed very human-made flying saucer technologies after World War II, drone technologies, into the secret science program that occasionally had to fly test flights of these new technologies in various air bases, and sometimes they didn't work, sometimes they crashed. And is that what people were getting close to that had to then be subjected to counterintelligence operations? Well, I don't know. I would say the evidence is likely, though. And I don't know if I have an ability to play this. I'm going to try to share the screen here because I do want to play a moment of even William Moore in, I believe it's 1992 or 93, describing now William Doty's interaction with William Moore. And you can watch the entire 2 hour or an hour broadcast that he makes at a MUFON UFO conference, where he reveals that he has always been a UFO disinformation operative. He basically, I don't know whether his conscience got the better of him, but he basically reveals that that's what he's been doing. And he goes through the entire program of Richard Doty, who has been giving him fake information for years. So I'm just going to play a few seconds of what he says here. Oh, let's actually stop that for a second because I just realized that I have this thing on playback speed too high. And we're going to stop the share and reshare it in a second. So let's remove you from the stage. We'll add this to the stage. And now I think it should be playable. So let's see if this works. 89. William Moore admitted that he was assigned by Air Force intelligence in order to spread disinformation into the UFO community with a special focus on using Paul Benowitz as a conduit.
In early September 1980, I was approached by a well-placed individual within the intelligence community who claimed to be directly connected to a high-level government project dealing with UFOs. This individual, who subsequently came to be known as the Falcon, I knew I was being recruited. But at that point, I had no idea for what. Unfortunately, there was no UFO crash at Aztec, nor was there much truth to any of the other material supplied to this particular researcher, either at that meeting or during later encounters. To the best of my knowledge, it was all disinformation. Now you know the truth. Disinformation is a strange and bizarre game. Those who play it are completely aware that an operation's success is dependent upon dropping information upon a target or mark in such a way that the person will accept it as truth and will repeat and even defend it to others as if it were true. Once this has been accomplished, we certainly have a number of rude people in this audience. That's too bad. Those who want proof of how well the process works need only look around you.
I hope that people were able to hear what he was saying. It was unfortunately a grainy video. However, very, very valuable to watch it in full, and also just to take into consideration that he actually didn't fully go become a normal person after this. He continued to become a contractor for operations that I've been outlining here on in this film. So Richard Doty, was as William Moore points out, he was known as the Falcon, as his contact person, feeding him fake information. But let's say, he reveals what is this thing called the Aviary, which was in the 1980s a very small grouping around Richard Doty that were working for intelligence agencies in overseeing this misinformation campaign, which Lawrence Rockefeller was bankrolling. So let's go a little bit more in detail into this Aviary, of which each member had a name of a bird. I suspect that this choice of using bird names for the various operatives was probably tied, I believe, to the CIA's Project Mockingbird, title, which just took on various other names after Mockingbird was revealed in 1975 with MKUltra and the other nefarious shenanigans of the CIA. So another figure within the Aviary was a guy named Colonel John Alexander. I'll just read the little bios I put together here, but his name was Penguin, and that was his code name after the Vietnam War, where he was actually a high-level officer working with the Green Berets. He was a Green Beret, so very elite training, but he was part of Operation Phoenix, a controlling figure in Operation Phoenix, where he would have been working very closely with Colonel Michael Aquino, the Satanist who headed up and created the Temple of Set to carry out a Babylon working ritual that was begun by L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons of the Jet Propulsion Labs under Aleister Crowley's lead in the 1940s to basically try to create the Antichrist through sex magic. That same Aquino, who was also a Green Beret, worked with John Alexander. So after the Vietnam War, Colonel John Alexander became a world leader in death science, parapsychology. He was a leading figure in non-lethal weapons at Los Alamos and had been closely involved in CIA remote viewing initiatives with a focus on mind control. And that includes here the Project Stargate is the main thing he was involved in. Michael Aquino, by the way, with Paul Vallée, both cite him as an authority in their Mind Wars from Psyop to Mind Wars paper done for the 7th Psyop group in 1981, which became the sort of core manual for the new guard of Jedi mind warriors that would be trained at Esalen and other things that would become the vanguard of the new warrior class that would oversee Iran-Contra, Operation Desert Storm, 9/11. So that whole thing was always tied to a UFO drug cult. Just saying that's a thing. So psychic warfare, and worked closely with Satanist Michael Aquino, both in the Vietnam War's Operation Phoenix program and bringing parapsychology, psychedelic drugs, and mind wars into military training programs during the 1980s. You have Owl, the codename of Dr. Hal Puthoff, a physicist with the Institute of Advanced Research in Austin, Texas, who had been both a high-ranking Scientologist. I think he went to OT Operating Thetan 7. It's very high. Closely affiliated with Rosicrucian Jacques Vallée before he was brought in to manage the CIA's Project Stargate, which involved trauma-based mind control on children from the 1970s to the 1990s. By all evidence, this program was an unbroken continuation of MK Ultra beyond the formal closure of the program in 1975. Chickadee was the name given for Commander C.B. Scott Jones, a former officer with the Office of Naval Intelligence and other agencies. He served as an advisor to Dick Cheney. He oversaw the revolution in military affairs in the 1980s with General Stubblebean and Colonel Aquino, for that matter, and was president and co-founder of the Human Potential Foundation, funded by American oligarch Lawrence Rockefeller. So that same Lawrence Rockefeller is funding the Human Potential Foundation, which C.B. Scott Jones is overseeing. Jones served as president of the American Society for Psychical Research, which has been a dominant nerve center of psychological warfare against citizens since the 19th century, when William James was the first president of the American Society of Psychical Research. Other members included Carl Jung, William Crookes, the head of the president of the British Royal Society, and Ghostbuster of the 19th century, William Crookes, who also plagiarized many of his discoveries that were actually made by real scientists. And he was the major handler and mentor of Nikola Tesla. So just saying, again, very strange little stories here and profiles of a lot of these characters. Now, again, as I mentioned, the Human Potential Foundation had one of its members in the form of Stephen Greer, who very quickly then moved on to becoming a UFO guru. Seagull was codename for Bruce Maccabee, research scientist in optical physics and laser weapons applications at the U.S. Naval Surface Weapons Lab, Maryland. In founding and chairing the Fund for UFO Research, FUFOR, Maccabee was instrumental in creating a conduit to funnel millions of dollars towards UFO investigations from 1979 to the present. It still exists. The agency helped fuel a robust industry around UFO disclosure hoaxes and propaganda. So a lot of this came out of the Project Blue Book or the Blue Ribbon Committee of the National Enquirer and NISAP, was this continuation of an ongoing funding mechanism around encouraging and incentivizing people to become stage magicians and liars to get money in order to promote more wild evidence that would then be popularized in the History Channel and Gaia and other things that would be amplifiers of the stories that would be legitimized under the fake science of these guys. Parrot was the name given for Jacques Vallée, a former astrophysicist with JEPAN, French government UFO investigative agency, who later moved to the U.S. as a principal investigator with Defense Department computer networks projects and worked with famed astronomer J. Allen Hynek in advancing world government agencies to monitor UFO phenomenon at the United Nations. He's also the creator of the aliens are demons from other dimensions narrative, the interdimensional alien hypothesis. That's his creation from the Passport to Magonia And he's also a major figure who's been friends with Kenneth Anger, one of Crowley's leading disciples in Hollywood, as well as many leading Manson family, Process Church of Final Judgment operatives, and Colonel Aquino himself, who he also knew and collaborated with, just to name a few. Anton LaVey, there's a number of photographs of him hanging out in Anton LaVey's house, celebrating whatever, the Church of Satan founder. So again, very, very strange backgrounds for a guy who's still in operation to this very day around the Disclosure Project. And Buzzard is a code name for Gordon Novel. There's a creepy face of Gordon Novel in the background, who is a freelance UFO disclosure researcher who was active in 2 CIA front companies during the 1960s, when New Orleans District Attorney General Jim Garrison, who is the guy who also uncovered the Zapruder film in the Time Life vault and forced it to be made public for the first time in his Garrison jury committee investigations into the conspiracy to kill JFK that was popularized by the Oliver Stone film JFK, and the character of Kevin Costner played Jim Garrison. But that was mostly all true stuff. That's not fiction right there. So when Garrison launched his famous investigation into the conspiracy to murder President Kennedy, Gordon Novel managed to get a job on Garrison's investigations team, where he played a sabotage role, leaking information to NBC reporters before being discovered, fired, and sued by Garrison. So this guy is another one with Corso, with C.D. Jackson, with the leading figures in the CIA who are killing JFK, working to sabotage the investigation into JFK's actual murder, and are the ones who are now promoting, most loudly, the UFO psyop. So there's a lot more to say. As you can imagine, there's a lot of work that's been going on over several generations in building up the psyop of Roswell. David Grush has made this the backbone of his testimonials. Luis Elizondo and so many others have also made this the backbone of their testimonials. And it is needed. People need to believe that this is true for everything else to work, because this whole thing, and to what degree Trump is aware or is not aware of a lot of the subtleties, I have no idea. I just know what I can discover and what I can communicate. And hopefully this information can help those who actually care about the truth to navigate this new increasing acceleration of disinformation, which might soon involve things like Project Bluebeam being brought into use, which I'm waiting for. We know that holographic technology has reached quite an advanced level that has been used already to showcase images of Jesus floating over the skies of Brazil and of Mexico, just to see, like what was done in the 1939 period in America, just to see how people would react in a very, very Christian, very Catholic worlds of an image of Jesus returning. Would they riot? What would they do? And these are, I think, are all precursors to ultimately looking above and seeing maybe Jesus with a flying saucer, right? Maybe that would be something we would also not be surprised to see over the skies of various countries, where things like Independence Day might be less of a fiction in the minds of many people and more of a template for what they want to do. And again, I'm reminded of Steven Spielberg's new film that's coming out very short, Disclosure Day. I'm not sure the release date of that specifically, but very useful to keep that in mind, that this is all part of one operation. And why now? Why now, as the system of globalization is going through an implosion, a systemic change, a collapse, and the world is being rewired? So why now are they pushing at this moment this major effort to release secret information and truths about U.S. government, or government more general, collusion with ETs? Why do they want us to think about that now? Should be the question. So I'm just going to scroll a little bit here and just see if there's any interesting questions before I roll out today's show. Actually, before I do even that, let me just look at the, I think I might have missed an ad. So let me just look here quickly to see. Yes, I did. Here's an ad here from Zach.
Today we remember those who gave everything. And memory is never still.
This Memorial Day! One hero, one mission! To deliver something!
technology. We can't stop your sex, dude. We have to deliver all of these soft disclosure gift cards.
He goes by Zach Kane.
The motion detector.
Hey, stop fighting over the beard brush.
Life finds a way.
Hydrate your elbows. Moisturize your soul. Feel the rhythm together. Makes you feel alive and let the lotion roll. Soft disclosure, hear the cry. Maximum softness. Do or die.
Muffin, hit it.
Okay, that was probably the funnest commercial that I've ever run on this network. That was hilarious. So yeah, let me just quickly run through a few comments here that caught my eye. It's always very difficult, as people know, for me to pay attention to comments while I'm trying to flow in one of these shows. So just scanning through very, very briefly. I've got a few minutes here before I have to close up today's show. What I got here is something from Socrates Invicta in American Cosmic. Diane Pasulka wrote about spending time with him. Oh, that's a reference to Jacques Vallée. That's correct. She noted that he had walls of books on the demonic or demons in his home in San Francisco. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. He describes, I mean, there's a lot to be said about Vallée and his hyper-productive work in this ritual. But I don't, Diane seems to be a genuine person, but I think she's being duped and misguided by very bad advice and guidance, where Vallée's narrative is very sophisticated in some ways, because he's the first one to correctly identify that the alien abduction cases, most of which began occurring around the time that a lot of these Satanists, or a lot of these radicalized military men, came back as Satanists, joining satanic covens and cults in America after the Vietnam War and Operation Phoenix, began to carry out, that was the time when you had a lot of serial killer operations really begin in full force from the Zodiac Killer onward. The 1980s and the Satanic Panic had only accelerated even more, right, into the early 90s. But that a lot of this is also the period where alien abduction cases began to be reported en masse. So the spike at that same time of alien abduction cases, which Jacques Vallée points out, have a lot of the same elements of satanic ritual abuse. So he correctly identifies that. It's just, I think, with the sleight of hand, I think the lie, I think it's conscious lie in Vallée's testimony or analysis, is that he is saying that the aliens have always been demonic forces that explains all of history's satanic agencies of abuse of human victims, going back to hundreds, thousands of years, with various demonic fairies and other things, kidnapping babies from villages in the Middle Ages, that are actually aliens that they didn't have a word for, that are coming into our dimension, but as aliens carrying out ritual abuse, which you could then learn about by reading grimoires and various black magic manuals of older periods. My position, I think what is more reasonable of an explanation, is that those same covens and satanic cults that Jacques Vallée appears to be a part of have always been doing these things. And it's true that people were probably coming up with stories of evil fairies and gnomes and what have you from the forests and witches to try to make an account for why these terrible things were happening to their children and why these abductions and things were occurring. But I think that that's what that the UFO thing has been just a more modern creation as a story of these same Satanists that have been always doing that stuff. I don't think that anybody was actually ever abducted by aliens per se. I think if anything, they were probably abducted by Satanists, like what Charles Manson was doing with the creepy crawly rituals, you know, getting his family members to creep into people's houses in the middle of the night and move things around and what have you. And maybe some of these people got some drugs put into their body while they were sleeping, and maybe they were removed and woke up in the woods with a painful ass and maybe cut marks on their arms, maybe injections in their arms, you know, and as they had to stumble back home hours later, not knowing how they got out of their house. I think that for me accounts for the phenomenon, and that also includes the cattle mutilating phenomenon, which again only began in the early 70s. Why not in the 50s and 40s and 30s? Why did the crop circles only really begin in the 70s? And they were poor quality. Why don't we have evidence of these things en masse before that? So for me, it just seems like part of the longer term magic, a multi-generational magic trick. And I think Diane is getting pulled into some bad advice on how to approach this. That's my thinking. Awesome work, says Sam. Found me on Mel K. Yeah, Mel K she's a fun friend. I appreciate Mel K. What do we got here? Shire Eve, I can't pronounce that name. With the demonic image there, says there is a certain level of mental block in understanding certain esoteric aspects due to personal bias for Matt. Okay, I don't really know what that would be, but I know that you are a fan of Gnosticism. I'm not. My research and my reading of the Nag Hammadi texts and the Sethian Gospels do lead me to believe I don't see any moral virtue in anything that I'm seeing there. I see that those are very theosophically written. I don't. Maybe if you could elucidate me and show me some higher quality wisdom in those Gospels, maybe I'll have a more nuanced view. So far, everything I've read, not seeing it. And yeah, the Luciferian Jesus, I know that there was a comment by Shire or Eve about Lucifer. I lost track of where that is. But yeah, there is a Luciferian Jesus. They are known as the Sethian Gospels. There's a number of them that did exist in the form of the Nag Hammadi scriptures that were unveiled out of Egypt in 1945. And they do feature a Jesus that portrays its identity as being the avatar of the serpent, the serpent that encouraged the eating of the fruit from the tree of knowledge. That same Sethian deity, that avatar that occupied the spirit, that Christ spirit that occupied the serpent at one time, later on occupied the physical character of Jesus when he became the Christ. And is encouraging secret doctrines, secret teachings to his favorites, Mary Magdalene, who he kissed on the mouth many times in one of the documents, and John being another of his favorites, who he had secret teachings to. That became the foundation of a lot of the satanic orders that continue to exist with inner esoteric teaching structures for the inner initiates and outer teaching orders for the uninitiated to suckle on. So yeah, those are widely known even amongst academic circles as the Sethian Gospels, based on that. And there's many of them. Some of them existed and were known before the Nag Hammadi scriptures were revealed. Some were newly revealed with the Nag Hammadi and Dead Sea Scrolls. So yeah, there's that. Let me just look. There might be time for one more here. Socrates says to Shire, the Nag Hammadi didn't cast Jesus as Luciferian outside of bringing the divine light into the evil material world of the demiurge Gnostic take on the Savior. Definitely in that context. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the Gnostic cosmology, is that we live in an evil world made evil made in the image of the evil Yaljabaoth, the evil demiurge that was a emanation of the ultimate creator of the being of light, which is ultimately transcendental and has no ability to intervene upon or influence or any aspect of this evil creation, which includes both the physical bodies that we're born into that are like prison bodies, in a prison planet. That's very much also what Alex Jones is a big fan of, with his weird Gnostic view of transhumanism and prison planet Gnosticism. But also that the only way to regain access to the creator is to shed break free of the shackles, not just of the flesh, but also of things like morality, the ideas of moral wisdom that are holding us back from actualizing and expressing our inner God, that light that we all have that wants to return to the source. That light has nothing to do with morality or justice or conscience. If anything, those things are holding us back. And so the rituals being created by those esoteric Gnostic sects are designed to depattern us and break us from all of those foreign entities, foreign agencies, those archons that are holding us back from our true God self, which includes also, again, sleights of hand occur this way, the notion that our conscience is a part of that, to be shed so that we can be liberated. I'm just realizing now it's 7:31 and Gordon has a channel on right on this studio, so I'm going to have to depart and give that space to Gordon. I hope you enjoy today's show. Check out our documentaries. I'll put them in the comment section below. The books as well are good resources to expand your understanding of the evils, the satanic evils of Gnosticism, and hopefully people can discover that for themselves and find a better, more firm basis of philosophy and cosmology to build their identities around, going into the psyops that we're going to be facing that will only get louder and more brutal in the weeks and months ahead. So without further ado, I'll leave it there. Take care, everybody. Until next week, goodbye.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.